This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hi, this is Daniel Greenfield for the Glazov Gang, offering you another Greenfield moment. Tonight we're going to discuss censorship, specifically social media censorship, and the role of the European Union in suppressing politically incorrect speech. As you may have heard, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Twitter helped create and sign a quote-unquote code of conduct banning, again, quote-unquote, hate speech. Facebook had already become notorious for its political agenda, while Twitter had created a Trust and Safety Council, which is a lovely euphemism, filled with extremist left-wing groups that were out to censor anything, any speech that was remotely politically incorrect. Google has historically been a free speech outlier. Its politics have never been ambiguous, but it has eschewed the overt censorship of some of its new partners, working to keep the European Union free of political dissent. But the code of conduct goes well beyond censorship. The companies, as announced by the European Union, will be working to strengthen their quote-unquote ongoing partnerships with civil society organizations who will help flag content that promotes incitement to violence and hateful conduct. What does this gibberish mean? It means that left-wing groups will be in charge of deciding what gets censored from social media. They will be responsible for denouncing people, and they will be responsible for getting opinions that they don't like taken down from Facebook, Google, YouTube, and other various social media outlets. This means, as a practical matter, that not only Twitter will get its own Trust and Safety Council, it already has a Trust and Safety Council, but Facebook, Google, and Microsoft will also have their own Trust and Safety Councils. These Trust and Safety Councils may be called something else entirely, they may not even have a name, but they will have power. That's what this really means, and it's only a starting point in the larger initiative. Again, quote-unquote, the IT companies and the European Commission recognizing the value of independent counter-speech against hateful rhetoric, although this is a nicely Orwellian turn of phrase, independent counter-speech, sponsored by the European Union and backed by major billionaire companies. But again, the IT companies, the European Commission, recognizing the value of independent counter-speech against hateful rhetoric and prejudice, aim to continue their work in identifying and promoting, and this is the key phrase here, independent counter-narratives. That's what the press release says. What is a counter-narrative? It means that they're not simply going to be taking down content that they find offensive, they're going to be promoting their own content, or rather they're going to be promoting content from these partners which are independent only in the completely euphemistic sense of the word. The European Union will partner with various left-wing advocacy groups, and the major corporations will now begin pushing their content on social media. And even more than censorship, the counter-narratives push represents a very troubling development. Because left-wing groups are now going beyond just being censors. They will be given a major outlet, some of really the biggest outlets around to promote their agenda. Right now, Facebook, Twitter have far more eyeballs than any television network does. They have far more media access than mere CNN or the New York Times. And they're going to be put at the disposal of left-wing organizations with agendas. The biggest resource for these companies with massive social media platforms isn't mere money, it's the ability to decide what's trending and what isn't. If a story about Islamic terrorism trends, will Facebook or Twitter be expected to promote a counter-narrative from an Islamic group? It appears that it will be. How exactly is this any different than traditional propaganda? Again, I'm quoting from the release, the IT companies to intensify their work with CSOs to deliver best practice training on countering hateful rhetoric and prejudice and increase the scale of their proactive outreach to CSOs to help them deliver effective counter-speech campaigns. The European Commission cooperation with member states to contribute to this endeavor by taking steps to map CSOs' specific needs, keyword, and demands in this respect. Again, what does all this ridiculous gibberish mean? CSOs is one of those fun abbreviations. You might have heard of NGOs or non-governmental organizations, another euphemism because in fact NGOs are funded by governments for the most part. But since NGOs have gotten a bad rap, so they're using CSOs, which stands for civil society organizations. In fact, it basically means the same thing. And what this tells us is that the European Commission will work with these left-wing advocacy groups. They will train major social media corporate companies that manage social media networks. And of course, they'll also offer demands. The European Commission and these various so-called CSOs will meet to provide specific demands in this respect to these companies. And these demands obviously had better be met because that's what demands are. They're blackmail. That's what's going on here. And these demands are obviously going to involve free speech because that's the real target here. What is any of this going to look like? We got a preview of it with Facebook's initiative for civil courage online. Facebook has been facing pressure from Germany's Merkel, who's worried about public outrage over crimes committed by Muslim migrant arrivals. So the obvious answer, as it is for all totalitarian states, is slap more censorship on it. The initiative promoted Click It Out, which is spelled with a K and is supposed to look really cute, but really just looks ridiculous, and urged people to see it, report it. It being social media discrimination, whatever the heck that is, and then users were expected to click it out. This actually looks like some sort of tin pot version of the Soviet Union, which is pretty much probably by design. Tech companies love the idea of creating counter-narratives. Of course, if you ask them would they rather spend time censoring the material or would they rather spend time promoting counter-narratives. Now, counter-narratives, of course, are fairly cheap comparatively because censorship is expensive. When you have to do censorship, that means you have to hire people to take material down. When you promote counter-narratives, then you just have to give airtime, and you already have a whole lot of airtime because you're effectively a giant social media network. So, of course, these organizations, Facebook, Twitter, Google, love the idea of promoting counter-narratives, which means giving money, which means giving support, which means raising the profile of various left-wing advocacy groups again and pushing their narratives and their agendas. The goal of companies like Facebook, on top of that, is to increase usage rather than reduce it, which is why they'd rather, instead of banning people, they would rather just put in more content. They would rather have more debates. Now, in a way, this is good for free speech. So when you have Facebook's COO saying that you should have like attacks, which is a ridiculous thing, she was basically pushing the idea that we need more usage rather than less usage because obviously Facebook makes more money from usage rather than from less usage. But this latest move is not going to mean more usage. It's not going to mean like attacks. It's not going to mean any kind of debate whatsoever. The code of conduct is a thorough rejection of any of that self-interested libertarianism. Censorship is packaged together with agenda pushing. There might be like attacks, but what the European Union really wanted was deletion and promotion for the groups that its leaders support, and they got it. They got it all the way. Some fraction of these efforts may be directed at ISIS supporters, but there's no particular reason to be optimistic about that. By putting CSOs first, the message is that this isn't about counterterrorism, but about promoting one set of political agendas at the expense of another. Much like Twitter's Trust and Safety Council, this is about selecting who should speak and who should be silenced. Programs like these operate under the umbrella of fighting extremism. And extremism, unlike blowing up buses or beheading hostages, is a very vague term. It's in the eye of the beholder, and the beholder is a left-wing tech company. You have a pretty good idea of where they're going to look for it. The obsession with radicalization treats lawful speech as the precursor to violence. It also assumes that Muslim terrorism emerges from a cycle of extremism between Muslims and critics of Islam. Silence the critics and you stop the terrorism. This is something the demonstration also loves doing. European governments like those of Angela Merkel are far less worried about Salafists than they are about domestic political dissents. Merkel isn't worried about Muslim terrorism. She's only worried about the political consequence, which means that domestic political opposition is far more dangerous to her than Islamic terrorists are. She has security. Ordinary people walking down the street do not. For her, the real mortal threat is political opposition and political dissent. So when Merkel berated Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg over insufficient censorship, it wasn't because she objected to the pipeline that feeds Muslims from Germany into ISIS. Muslim terrorism is inconvenient, but political dissent is potentially explosive. Now, social media is an alternative organizing force that counters the dominance of media narratives. It's supposed to be in the forum where you share something with your friends and your friends share something. And that kind of interaction makes it possible to bypass conventional narratives. It makes it possible to bypass the whole top-down media structure. And that's what makes social media a threat, which is why it has to be controlled. Attempts to silence more prominent voices have run into a backlash. You hear about these controversies where somebody's Facebook account or Twitter account gets deleted, but it's generally famous people. When you do it to ordinary people, nobody's really going to pay attention. And it's really physically impossible to rally in support of each person, each ordinary person who has their account shut down or their blog pushed down in the rankings for having politically incorrect views. Social media at its best brings people together. This initiative is about disrupting social organizations that are disapproved of. It is about preserving the dominance of a government media narrative or promoting astroturf organizations that try to appear independent, but really echo that very same narrative. Private companies have the right, obviously, to determine what content appears on their platform. Facebook has a right to do that. Google has a right to do that. Microsoft has a right to do that. Friendster, if it's still around, has a right to do that. But the problem in this case is that Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Twitter become part of an alliance with governments and advocacy groups to maintain a particular narrative. That's propaganda, it's dishonest, it moves them out of the category of a private company into an adjunct of government. They're not simply going to be removing so-called hateful content. Instead, they will have undertaken to play a role in putting forward a particular set of ideas by particular governments, and this is Pravda. This is propaganda. And it's the opposite of how the internet was meant to be used. The deal puts a series of private organizations backed by European Union government power in charge of determining the content of social media, both positive and negative. Social media was meant to be centered around the user. Instead, this deal displaces the user and replaces him or her with the majestic glory of the European Union. I hope you found this broadcast worthwhile. If you did enjoy it, please help support the Glazov Gang. Subscribe to the Glazov Gang YouTube channel. Help support the Glazov Gang by going to the website and watching other fine videos featuring Jamie Glazov himself and other of his fine guests. Have a good night.